Hello, my name is Paul Gavriluk, and I'm a host of the Spiritual Perception program. And today in the studio with us is Professor Mark Spencer, who teaches philosophy in the philosophy department at the University of St. Thomas. Welcome to the studio.
Thanks for having me, Paul.
Well, Mark, tell us, in your own work in phenomenology, what triggered your interest in the subject of spiritual perception?
Yeah, so phenomenology is a branch of philosophy that helps us very rigorously analyze our own experiences. And when I was first introduced to phenomenology, really as an undergraduate, I found that it was quite a helpful technique for understanding my own experiences, my own religious experiences. And what the phenomenologist helps us focus on is these experiences that we often have of the presence of God in the world. Many religious believers have these experiences, but they can seem vague at times. One can question whether they actually happened. And phenomenology provides us with a set of techniques to analyze them and to focus on which ones are genuine and which ones aren't. And I really found this very helpful in understanding my own spiritual life, and that really launched my interest in this topic.
Mm-hmm. So how does phenomenology go about it? In other words, could you just say a few things about the methods that are being used, or perhaps what phenomenology is?
So phenomenology is a movement that really got started in the very early 20th century and has continued up to the current day. And it's this series of techniques, philosophical techniques, in which we try to put out of attention everything except what is directly presented to us in experience. So all the things that we merely believe, all the things that we infer or reason to, we set aside, and we just focus on what sorts of objects are presented to us directly in experience.
So would that help us analyze what spiritual perception would mean to most people in everyday life?
Yeah, good. So I want to focus on two phenomenologists I think who really help us here. So one of them is Max Scheler. He was a German phenomenologist in the early part of the 20th century. And Scheler was really interested in experiences of feeling. And he thought feeling actually presents us with objects. So think, for example, if you're at a sports match, you can feel the vitality of the athlete, right? You watch the athlete, but you're not just seeing them with your eyes, you're not just hearing them with your ears, but you're feeling their aliveness, their strength. And we have many of these experiences of feeling in which objects in the world, what Scheler calls values, or ways that things are important, are presented to us through the feeling. Well, one of those sorts of feelings that we have is what he calls the feeling of holiness. Right? You can see and feel the holiness of, say, a saint. You encounter someone who really is a living saint, you can feel their holiness. Or you can feel the presence of God, say, in nature, in a sort of sacramental kind of way. And phenomenology provides us with a set of techniques where, again, we focus in very carefully on particular experiences of feeling and analyze exactly what sort of object, what sort of value is presented to us there. And so by focusing on these different sorts of holiness that are presented to us, we can see how spiritual perception really arises in everyday life.
So I think one could certainly concede that there would be these affective reactions to reality. But some philosophers would say, or would be inclined to see these feelings as primarily subjective and not really telling us a lot about what reality presents. So how would somebody like Scheler or perhaps other phenomenologists address that kind of concern?
Yeah, good. So what phenomenology does is it helps us not only focus in on experience, but very carefully distinguish different kinds of experience. So it's true that we have subjective feelings, right? That is, feelings which primarily aim at my own internal states, right? Think about, say, hunger or certain forms of depression, in which what I'm really feeling, again, is this subjective internal state. But many other experiences of feeling don't show up that way. There's a marked difference in the way the experience presents itself to us. So when I feel the holiness of someone that I encounter, it's not an experience of my own holiness. It's an experience of the other's holiness being presented to me through this feeling that, as it were, reaches out into the world.
And on Shaler's account, what is it that feeling helps us to do? In other words, is this a matter of attention? Is this, I mean, what is it that feeling does, shall we say? Or is feeling itself, well...
Yeah, good. So feeling plays a couple of different roles. So first of all, feeling is itself a sort of perception, including a sort of spiritual perception for Shaler. It's through the very feeling of holiness itself that the holiness of the other or the sacramental presence of God is presented to me. But feeling also opens us up and, as you say, guides our attention, guides our focus, so that using our other abilities, the other sorts of experience we can engage in, so sense perception, thinking, we're able to be more attuned to certain features of our experience. Here's a place where I think another phenomenologist really helps. This is the second one that I wanted to mention. It's a contemporary phenomenologist, Jean-Luc Marion. And Marion describes how the feeling of love opens us up to certain perceptual experiences in which a certain excess of things is presented to us. So if we have this sort of loving openness to the world, the beauty of things, or again, the holiness of things, is capable of presenting itself to us. And what we experience there is, again, this sort of excess. These objects cannot be contained within any concepts that we might have. Rather, they exceed all of our concepts. And Marion thinks this is a sort of experience we have all the time. We might not attend to it, but it's an experience that's always there, available for us.
Well, yes, I mean, it's fascinating the extent to which, of course, this ability to perceive things in access also depends on our background beliefs about these experiences. So again, another potential objection to this approach to reality would be to say that, well, we tend to see holiness, or we are overwhelmed with the presence of God because that's a part of our religious background. And so the question is, aren't we to some extent engaged in a projection of religious background onto this reality? How would one respond?
Yeah, so I think the technique of phenomenology can really help us answer this objection, again, by carefully distinguishing different kinds of experience. Right? So it's true that we sometimes do project. Right? We've got a belief, we're looking for something in the world, and we take our religious belief or theological ideas and project that out there. But that's very different, experientially speaking, from these experiences that Shaler's describing of the feeling of holiness. And it's certainly different from these experiences of excess that Marion is describing, where something presents itself to us that totally overwhelms our beliefs and can't be contained within those beliefs. So by helping us focus on and distinguish different kinds of experience and different objects that are presented to us in experience, phenomenology allows us to really distinguish between those and provide us with some criteria for distinguishing when we're projecting and when we're genuinely perceiving.
What I'm particularly curious about is precisely, since Marion emphasizes love as this basic attitude, perhaps of openness to the world, etc. And I think I would concede that that's certainly true. But what one does would one do about, for example, love that is simply an infatuation with the object? So what does one do with, let's say, romantic love, in which the value of the object is to some extent exaggerated,
distorted. Yeah, right. So again, I think for the same reasons that phenomenology can help us distinguish between when we're projecting and when we're perceiving, phenomenology, which is really a sort of mental discipline for attending very carefully to different sorts of experience, can provide us again with a set of criteria when we are merely infatuated and when it is this love that is a genuine openness towards the world. Those have very different characters. The objects of those attitudes show up very differently for us. And by carefully attending to these different kinds of experience, again, we can come up with a set of criteria when we're doing the one or when we're doing the other.
Fascinating. Well, I mean, it seems that phenomenology can teach us a lot about actually who we human beings fundamentally are. To you personally, what are the main takeaways on this very issue?
Good, yeah. So phenomenology not only helps us analyze our own experience and analyze the objects that are given to us in experience, but it also helps us sort of have a body of data on which we can reflect and ask, what must I be fundamentally in order to have experiences like this? And so what we see, I think, if we pay careful attention to these experiences of spiritual perception, is we find that we human beings are, in a sense, not only the sorts of beings that have objects given to us, but we find ourselves given to ourselves in that experience. What we fundamentally are is not, say, a mere object, nor are we a sort of I or a will that has complete control over our experience. Rather, we find ourselves as, to some extent, fundamentally passive before the world. And Marion emphasizes this to a great extent. He says, what I fundamentally am, and this shows up especially in spiritual perception, is the gifted. I am given to myself. I receive myself as I experience this excess in the world.
That's an extraordinary, really extraordinary insight. Could you also tie this whole issue that we are not merely objects, that human beings should not be objectified, to Shaler's feeling of value and this experience of value and what you describe as value perception?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think the things that Shaler is describing and the things that Marion is describing, even though they're 50, 60 years apart, are very, very similar to one another. Yes, what I show up as to myself, how I experience myself when I'm presented with value, is again not as a mere thinker or a mere will that has conceptual control over the world. Rather, I show up as fundamentally a lover, one who is open to the world, one who is capable of receiving what gives itself to me from the world.
That's such a captivating, really, picture, account of human condition. And so thank you so much for sharing these thoughts with us today. And those of us who would be interested in learning more in depth about the subject, you're welcome to read Professor Spencer's forthcoming essay in the second volume on the contemporary models of spiritual perception. Again, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Paul.
Thanks for watching us, and we hope that you will join us for the next episodes of the Spiritual Perception program. Goodbye.